The Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962 was a direct and dangerous confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War, and was the moment when the two superpowers became closest to nuclear conflict. Also known as the October Crisis, the Caribbean Crisis, and the Missile Scare. It was a 13-day argument that was very tense. The United States didn't want the Soviet Union to put the missiles in Cuba. If the missiles were to be launched, it would destroy part of the United States as well. Soviets wanted to put the missiles in Cuba to stop aggression from the United States. They knew by placing these missiles, the United States would be scared and prevent conflict with the Soviet Union. Countries were trying to keep the United States and Soviet Union from going into battle with each other. If either starts losing, they will press a button to launch nuclear bombs that will essentially kill everyone. In July 1962, Soviet Premier Nikita reached a secret agreement with Cuban Premier Fidel Castro to place Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba to deter any future invasion attempt. Even though Nikita had promised he would not send any offensive weapons to Cuba. Because of this, the United States formed the Executive Committee of the National Security Council and ordered a naval quarantine of Cuba. Construction of several missile sites began in the late summer, but U.S. intelligence discovered evidence of a general Soviet arms buildup on Cuba. Soviet Union eventually agreed to remove the missiles if the United States promised not to invade. Later, the leader of the Soviet Union, Khrushchev, wanted the U.S. to also promise they would remove the U.S. Jupiter missiles from Turkey. That same day, a U.S. plane was shot down over Cuba. Kennedy prepared for an attack on Cuba within days. Kennedy said USSR would supervise the Soviet Union's takedown of the nuclear missiles and promised not to attack Cuba. People say this was the closest the Cold War got to becoming a nuclear war. 1962 World Relief as Cuban Missile Crisis ends. An agreement ending the immediate threat of nuclear war by Russian leader Nikita. He agreed to dismantle all Russian missiles based in Cuba and ship them back to the Soviet Union. And in 1998, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was signed, which was a promise that they would not provide nuclear weapons to other countries. In April 1961, the CIA launched what its leaders believed would be the definitive strike. A full-scale invasion of Cuba by 1,400 American-trained Cubans who had fled their homes when Castro took over. However, the invasion did not go well. The invaders were badly outnumbered by Castro's troops, and they surrendered after less than 24 hours of fighting. The first part of the plan was to destroy Castro's tiny air force, making it impossible for his military to resist the invaders. On April 15, 1961, a group of Cuban exiles took off from Nicaragua and conducted a strike against Cuban airfields. However, it turned out that Castro and his advisors knew about the raid and had moved his planes out of harm's way. On April 17, the Cuban exile brigade began its invasion at an isolated spot on the island's southern shore known as the Bay of Pigs. Also immediately, the invasion was a disaster. Unexpected coral reefs sank some of the exiles' ships as they pulled into shore. Castro's troops had pinned the invaders on the beach, and the exiles surrendered after less than a day of fighting.